Well, welcome everyone to episode 2 of When Tomorrow Comes. I'm pleased to say that back by popular demand, we have Ashley. Hi Ashley, you all right?
Hi Ian, yes, I'm good, thank you.
We're joined this week by a veritable list of people. So we've got Alice Hawkins. Alice, you there?
Hi Ian, yes I am.
We've got the big man, Kieran Hodgson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to see you, Kieran.
Likewise.
We've got the other Kieran, the one with the weird spelling. Kieran.
Hello all.
Can't see you. Speak up, I can't see you.
Hello, good to see you.
There you
Did
go.
you see me then?
See you now. And we've got Charlotte Orrell.
Hello there.
What happened to you last week, Charlotte?
Okay, so I might be the techie one, but I had a slight technical issue. But it's fine, it's resolved and I've learned from it.
All right, good. I'm glad to see you got the memo about the roll neck jumper as well. Everyone else failed to wear theirs. Have I missed anyone? Has everyone assembled?
Yes, all present and correct, I think.
Good. Right. So this week we're gonna really we're following on, Kieran, from, for those that haven't perhaps seen it, from the email that you issued across the airwaves this morning. Do you want to, rather than me trying to summarise what you said, why don't you briefly summarise what you said, and then we'll use that to kick off today's discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. No, look, great, thanks. And I was just picking up on emails actually this morning following the publication of that, and it's been really well received. And I've had sort of subsequent chats with various colleagues and clients and people in councils over it too. And I think, I mean, what we've tried to do in a nutshell is stay very close to what local authorities are doing by way of decision making. I mean, obviously we're living in the most extraordinary times at the moment, but the principal objective for us, and indeed councils, is to try and keep the show on the road. And a key part of that is being able to maintain normal business as far as is possible. And to execute decisions smoothly and swiftly to keep the economy going and to keep housing delivery going, really. So what we tried to do is, in the email, is just to provide a summary of some of the legal points associated with that, the old Local Government Act and the Coronavirus Act, the pending regulations from our Secretary of State, which are hopefully going to enable a lot more things to come forward. But then also just to summarise for everyone's benefit, the latest position with all local authorities in London and where they're at and what they're doing with regard to day-to-day business in their planning offices and their planning teams, but also importantly what they're doing with decision-making and moves towards an increasing amount of virtual meetings, really. That's where it's heading. So that was the purpose of the email, and I think most people have found that helpful to understand where their local authority is. And certainly, as I said earlier on, it's been pretty well received. So I think that's probably the starting point for the conversation. And I know certainly from some of the calls I've had this morning and various chats with people in councils in particular, questions emerging as to what extent is virtual decision making undemocratic, perhaps? How might it favour or include and potentially exclude certain members of the community? How do you make sure democratic decision making is firstly not only fully democratic but also accountable, fair and accessible? And all those sorts of questions raised, really.
Okay, so Kieran, if I can perhaps bring some other people in. Kieran with a C, you obviously pick up on a lot of projects from an engagement perspective, direct contact with community groups, being at the sharp end of consultation. What are the challenges in that sense, Kieran, in keeping the wheels moving?
Well, I think the other Kieran's just touched upon some of that. A perception that it is fully democratic. Inevitably, a lot of the people that we deal with are less familiar with online technologies, and there is always a risk that those people can't access them, so can't properly engage with the process. I think there's also, from my point of view, another flip side in that there's the online world. One of the great things about it is the anonymity that it provides people, and anonymity can be quite empowering, but possibly not in a positive way towards planning processes. So I think there's kind of two aspects of this: there's being truly democratic and opening up for everyone, and ensuring that everybody has access to the same facilities and the same technologies, but also what it does when you are working in this kind of way, in the way that that whole keyboard warrior syndrome and the effects that can have on the process.
Kieran, I don't know what your opinion is, but for me, looking at this and hearing you guys talk about it, there could be some real opportunities as well. So for my generation, who've probably never been that active in planning, never really paid any interest whatsoever, by utilising technology and sort of thinking about how technology can help in the consultation process, we might actually take quite a few steps forward in engaging the younger generation and getting their voices heard. I don't know what your opinion is on that.
I think that's absolutely right. I think there's definitely quite a lot of opportunities to broadening the conversation. But I think I'll go back to a process I was involved in Tower Hamlets, where the Mayor of Tower Hamlets stood up in front of a very large public gathering there. And perhaps controversially for him as a democratically elected leader, said that in planning processes, sometimes even if 99% of the people are supportive, we do need to still listen to that 1% that aren't, and really understand the reasons and their arguments as to why, and take those on board. So I think there is always this kind of the great sort of untapped potential of those that are supportive, but similarly, we do need to always understand what the people's genuine concerns are and try to address those in the best way that we possibly can.
And equally, Kieran, it's great that we're talking about using modern forms of technology to engage with people. How do we continue to engage with those people that don't have access to laptops, don't have access to mobile phone technology, are simply not comfortable using video conferencing? How are we going to deal with those people?
Well, I think there's at the moment we're advising clients in a variety of different ways, because we as a team cover quite a broad spectrum of different projects, everything from very small housing developments to large-scale estate regenerations. And I think there's different sensitivities with all of those different projects. But when it comes down to it, we still have a operational postal service. We still have traditional forms of communication through telephones, through letter, through newsletters, through a certain amount of printed media as well, I would imagine, get out to people. So there are still those techniques that we can employ. So at the moment we're talking to clients about shifting things online using video conferencing, using those kind of more modern methods, but at the same time offering very simple phone consultations off the back of a delivery of a newsletter or something like that. And obviously it's curious times, and we are very fortunate to still have the Royal Mail operational, because otherwise we'd be really struggling to make sure that we can be as inclusive as possible.
No, so I think what we're saying is there's still a place for the old ways of communicating, and it's marrying it with new and getting the best and making it as robust and as comprehensive as possible.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So I've been speaking to, obviously, we've got a lot of partners that do digital technologies, and one of them, who's quite well known, was very clear that driving traffic to their platform is quite a challenge, and the best method of actually doing that is at face-to-face interactions. So they, even though they are massively supportive of online platforms and that's their core business, they still rely on the face-to-face engagement to actually make sure that their thing works. So I think it's changed. I should say it has changed in the past couple of weeks, but we've always got to bear that in mind. That it's two things. It's all approaches that could be considered.
Alice, I know you did a lot of the analysis that Kieran took all the glory for in his email this morning. Could you maybe just perhaps give us a few examples of what you're finding, what other colleagues are finding from different authorities? Perhaps good examples, but perhaps also where we may need to help others to sort of move them along and keep things going.
Yeah, sure, Ian. So obviously that information's been put together across a whole wide range of people across Iceni, speaking with local authorities based on their projects as well. And I think the key, sort of the main point is every single local authority in London now is definitely remote working and working from home, and they're all using a variety of different systems to do that. But I think Microsoft Teams is becoming sort of the primary use of that. Interestingly, actually, we also had a webinar this morning from Landmark Chambers that noted that there are some potential security issues around Zoom, and therefore authorities are preferring Microsoft Teams. I think that's sort of a baseline, even though some are struggling a little bit more with their servers than others. But in terms of how innovative they're then being off the back of sort of advice such as that from the Chief Planner that was issued last week, I think there is a bit of a variety. So some authorities are embracing that, embracing the change and trying to sort of think forward about how they might be able to, for example, conduct virtual planning committees, which is one thing that a lot of people have been talking about after the Coronavirus Act, Section 78 has enabled the Secretary of State to issue legislation on that, as Kieran noted, and also potential virtual site visits as well. Local authorities are starting to look into. Waltham Forest actually is an interesting example, who conducted apparently their first planning committee using video link yesterday, and I know a number of other authorities are looking into that now, including Westminster have announced that their next planning committee will be conducted via video link. There have been also some other interesting approaches, particularly, for example, in Merton, where they've decided to maybe go the route of enhancing their delegated powers a little bit, and therefore deciding more or making more decisions via delegated powers rather than committee. And yeah, with site visits, we have also noticed that whilst the majority have been suspended, that there are local authorities that are starting to look into using drones, or also interestingly, I know Richmond and Wandsworth have mentioned using Microsoft Teams actually to do that. So whether that means somebody walking around the site and filming it, and then sort of sending it via video link to others, so they're sort of self-isolating and they're at the site alone, is also another potential sort of avenue that local authorities are looking at. I think there have been very few local authorities that we can say we've seen take a slightly less innovative approach, or as you sort of said, you know, maybe a more bad example. But there have been some local authorities, for example, where I know recently on projects we've been asking for a virtual meeting, you know, just a simple Zoom or Microsoft Teams instead, and they've offered to provide written pre-app feedback instead, which can be a bit frustrating, particularly given large pre-app fees and things like that. But hopefully, particularly with the Chief Planner advice, that will start to change, and also with the sort of the legislation coming out allowing local authorities and giving them more power to do things such as virtual planning committees.
All right, great. That's pretty encouraging. I was going to just say, Ashley, maybe you want to come in and just offer a thought. I mean, we touched on this to a certain extent last week in our first broadcast, but perhaps if I could also ask you just to give some thought to perhaps what's happening outside of London, and if anyone else wants to comment, because I'm conscious it won't just be Londoners watching this, and we're keen to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, Ian, you've taken the words out of my mouth. I was actually going to just ask Alice a quick question on that. Obviously, the note that went out this morning in our Wednesday email was focused on London, and that's because, you know, we have a lot of contacts there and we've managed to collate that information. But one thing I do wonder is whether London was already maybe placed at some sort of advantage in terms of being able to adapt to this new way of working, you know, because of maybe constraints on office space in London, meaning that people work from home more often. And I certainly know from experience in a number of local authorities outside London that they are really not prepared for working from home. For example, planning officers who do not have laptops, and they have firewalls that block Microsoft Teams, which means that any sort of virtual video call is not possible. And I just wondered what others thought about whether London had that advantage, and perhaps there are some local authorities out there who are currently struggling and who are trying to kind of keep up with the pace of change, because these things have happened very quickly, and that this is going to take a little bit longer for a number of local authorities to adjust to this.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Obviously, we, like you said, we focused on London for the purposes of our analysis in our Wednesday email. But I do know that some of, we even within Iceni, I think our Scottish team have been reporting some difficulties as well with local authorities in terms of receiving phone calls and things like that. And I think there will be an adjustment period. And we have also seen that even with some of the local authorities in London, in the first week, they've sort of been just adjusting their systems just to working at home, and now we're starting to catch up. So I do think there may be a delay with other areas. But as also every council is taking their own approach. As I mentioned with Merton doing enhanced delegated powers, I think Windsor and Maidenhead are doing similar. And I think different authorities will have to find different ways around their own ways of working.
And Alice, or anyone else for that matter, I mean, this is centred mainly on local authorities. Do we have any thoughts on what other stakeholders are doing, whether that's, government offices, different agencies that we're dealing with? Obviously, as planners, we're used to dealing with highways authorities and environmental agencies and other utility companies. Do we have any other thoughts on what's happening out there at the moment?
I think the few we've come across, in addition to local authorities, Ian, obviously the GLA, who are mostly proactively working from home now. Historic England as well, ditto, they're doing the same. And outside London, 1 or 2 county councils. So I think where we found our work sort of stretching outside of London, it has been slightly slower to pick up. I think echoing Ashley's comments, because I just don't think they are technologically as enabled, and it really is just simple as that. They haven't got the kit, they haven't got the hardware, and they haven't got the software, but they're catching up quick. But I think we've found, Alice and Charlotte, haven't we, with our work over the past week, there's a strong sort of impetus on us to kind of show the way in many respects, and kind of give them the answer. So we've had numerous situations where we've been on the telephone with a planning officer or a local authority planning team member in the normal way, and we said, well, look, can we do this via Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Blue Jeans? Many other brands have been available, and they've gone, well, look, what's that? And it's like, well, look, we'll send you a quick link now, click on it and we'll show you. And once the link's been sent and they've clicked and the meeting's happening, they get to see how useful the technology is and the ease and convenience and the practical utility of it. And that's encouraged them into doing more, I think it's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I would echo that point. And I think as well, one thing that we've been trying to do quite often, because we've had a few issues with local authorities who immediately their response to us is, we don't have this technology, we've not got it set up yet. One thing that we've been trying to do is to set up a test call with them. So we set out the options to them, these are what we could try and use. And then it is taking a bit more time for us, but the value in us putting in a little bit of time to do a test call with them means that then when it comes to the meeting, there's no time wasted. Everyone understands how to use the technology, and you can then use that going forward. So I definitely agree that I think planning consultants have a big role to play in just maybe educating local authorities a little bit on what options are available and how it can benefit both parties. From what we're seeing, local authorities are keen to keep on moving forward and they're keen to keep projects moving. They don't want COVID-19 to be a reason for delay, but they just need maybe a little bit more assistance than others. And I think, Ian, your point on other agencies or sort of groups of people who we're involved with, we've been speaking to a few different design review panels, and from those we've spoken to, they seem really, really open to doing video calls. A lot of them have actually said that they have had meetings via video link and Microsoft Teams before any of this happened. So we're getting a really, really good response from them. And in fact, they're really keen to kind of keep up conversations and to make sure that they're linked up with local authorities and helping them as well.
This is perhaps a difficult question to put, but I'll put it anyway. I mean, in this remote working environment, do you think that the ability of authorities and other agencies to participate in video calls and basically being available to keep the wheels of local government moving should be reflected in planning performance agreements and in the fees that are being requested from developers to participate in that process? I mean, put it another way, if £1,000 laptop is a prohibition to moving a project forward, we might expect some of our clients to ask questions about what they're paying their money for.
Yeah, I think we have already had some discussions along those lines with particular local authorities, whereby as part of the kind of resource agreement alongside your PPA, we're looking into whether we can, if it's necessary for them to have a particular software to facilitate a project moving forward, but that is also helpful for them in their wider work, then those conversations are actually being had, because local authorities are at a sticking point where they're being asked to use different types of technologies that they simply don't have access to, but at the same time they don't want to use that as a reason for not proceeding with a project.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I don't think it's too dissimilar to some of the things that we do now already. So we use things like Iceni, and councils might not necessarily have had that software, but we've been the ones to invest in it because it speeds up the process. It reduces the risk, and developers are already willing to do that because they see the benefits of it. So asking to contribute towards the technology, or say, for example, having a Zoom account, which does cost money, I don't see why clients would be against that if in the long term it means that they're going to see the benefits in terms of efficiency.
I think the question is just about providing everyone with the tools they need to do the job as efficiently as possible, isn't it? And Zoom and video conferencing and all of those methods are perhaps just another tool to enable that, and not a tool we've used or relied upon too much in the past, but is a tool now which we're using all the time out of absolute necessity. And I think actually, even when we're back to normal business post-COVID-19, the use of video conferencing is going to remain front and center, because people will learn how good and how efficiency it's been. Whether that's reflected in the longer term downstream in reduction in pre-app fees, for example, reduction in planning performance agree fees, for example, all remains to be seen. But there's a very straightforward, economic question, isn't there? Which is, well, look, if we can get everything we wanted to get out of this pre-app meeting through holding a virtual site visit and a Zoom meeting, surely that's made us all more efficient, hasn't it? Surely that's made this process take less time, hasn't it? Therefore, is it reasonable to reflect that in the fee? I think they're all fair questions, aren't they?
And I think it's important as well, when you're talking about the long term, to sort of get excited about the authorities coming on board to this and sort of maybe opening up their eyes a little bit more, because in the background for over a year now, we've been pushing for investment in AI, obviously validation all done automatically and things like that. And authorities usually haven't had the money or the knowledge in the departments to drive for that and push for that. And it's going to be interesting as we come out and as we start using more of the technologies to see whether the excitement does build up around it, whether the importance of things like AI technologies actually does start to get fed in, and it all helps us towards that transition long term, and the benefits that come to both parties.
Kieran with a C, we've touched on this. We've talked about things like Google Paper, and it just strikes me some of these things aren't massive investments. Can you just give us a sense of the sort of things that you're trying to lead on?
That'll be Google Cardboard, I think you meant.
Yeah, I'm sure once it's edited, I've said that.
Well, I think, there's a lot that you can do, whether it be, as we've heard today, lots of people joining in on webinars. We've talked about virtual site visits, and talked about drone footage. I think 360 video is going to be a kind of key thing. So that's what Google Cardboard essentially is. I think there's quite a lot of things where you can really put people in a position where they are in control of the interaction, and I think that's going to be the key thing as we go forward with much more online technologies, is that making people feel empowered so they can explore proposals, whether it's or sites, and actually feel as though they've really engaged directly with them, is probably going to be something that, for instance, a planning committee would have rarely done on the majority of applications. So it's going to be quite interesting, the new world that we're in that these are going to be much more prevalent. We're also talking about, we're talking to clients a lot about virtual exhibitions, about how we put, and this is kind of my key concern at the moment, is how we actually keep it very people focused. I think making it personal is certainly part of the engagement process, being there, talking people through the proposals, seeing their kind of concerns written in their faces and in their body languages, and actually being able to directly address those. And I think that's where we're putting in a lot of effort, is how we actually use these existing and new technologies and actually keep that kind of face-to-face directness.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm conscious of the time. I think we've probably been speaking 20 or so minutes, so we should probably wrap it up. But before I do, as I think will become tradition, I do like to ask people where they're doing their recordings from. Kieran Edwards, your backdrop is really boring, so I'm not even going to bother talking to you. But Kieran Hodgson, tell us about your owl and your candelabra, because I'm sure people would like to know a bit more about that. Yeah,
so I'm doing my home working from my this is my dining room, so I'm very lucky to live out in the sticks, and there's plenty of room for home working, which is great. And then I've had a lot of comments on the background, so that's the owl and the little taxidermy insertion, which is one of many in my house. I mean, it's tasteful, isn't it? Simple as that. Yeah, welcome to my dining room.
Lovely. And Alice, you were rearranging your washing when we first came on. Where are you filming from?
Yeah, Ian. So I'm filming from my living room, and you did catch me in the middle of hanging up my laundry over here.
Lovely.
I hope you'll forgive the laundry in the background.
That's good. And Ashley, you've taken heat from last week when I was criticising your backdrop. That's a much more interesting backdrop this week.
Yes, I've moved through to the living room, so I've got the fireplace and the terrarium behind me here. So yes, it's a bit brighter as well, so it's a much nicer to work from.
And Charlotte, I'm surprised you're not on the rowing machine at the moment.
It's literally just here, just so I can touch it. No, I'm in my kitchen, and I was just explaining that I made a blackboard for the kitchen, which usually has my social life on it, and you'll see it's got absolutely nothing. So
I want to see a virtual. Need to see a virtual social life next time I speak to you. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us on this. I mean, I think there's definitely some actions there in terms of thinking about what's going on in the wider country, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in due course. But thank you everybody for joining us for episode 2. If we had a sponsor, and if we were popular, this is where I'd mention. This is where I talk about Dolmio sauce or something, you know. So that's something we need to fill in due course. But thank you all very much for participating today, and look forward to joining everybody for episode 3. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ian. See you.